So real diversity has never been tried.
Never.
No, not once.
This sounds a bit communist.
All of human history, turns out. And I don't really know where the segment's going, because this is really just something that's been on my mind for a while. I don't really know how to put into words, so sorry if it's a bit of a mess. Bit of a mess myself right now, because a huge-ass ulcer on the back of my throat. But we'll go through it. We'll start off just with the fact that the census data proves Britain is not a nation of immigrants, being an article on Lotus.com, which Carl proved just by looking at numbers. Numbers said something happened in the 1990s. We're still not sure as to exactly what. Still up for debate, but we'll find out. And, well, if we get the next one here, we can see this thread, in which a local man just writes hateful thoughts for a living, presumably. And he writes here with his graphic, just true diversity has never been tried, with 4 flags, being Lebanon, Yugoslavia, South Africa, and Papua New Guinea. And, well, I suppose we'll take a look, real quick, at the ethnic makeup in a map form of each one of these. I mean, there we have Papua, which is pretty goddamn diverse. I mean, these are graphed here as the different groups, and I don't know how much more diverse there is in the world. You want to go to the right for this one, that side of the island. But it's just, okay. I mean, there's a next level diversity right there. Presumably, they're the strongest human beings on planet. Superpower by 2030, or was it 2020? I can't remember which one India was shouting about. We'll get to Lebanon as well. Slightly different there. We had to use a religious map because, well, the ethnic data's become a bit weird. But one of the weird things, if you talk to demographers, is very often in parts of the world you'll find that religion, people will answer that as their ethnicity.
Yep.
Like in Serbia, you ask someone what ethnicity you are, and they're so Orthodox. Serb. Okay, right. That's how that works. You can see here, again, amazing diversity. Lebanon. I don't know, maybe a rising power in the coming age, which should already be a risen power.
Isn't diversity their strength?
Exactly. Not Hamas.
But has it been tried, really?
Well,
has it been tried?
South Africa is another example of it's been tried. Here, there's a bit more homogeneity. Really just a divide between the East and the West looking at it. The red there is meant to be, I believe that's the black Bantu population, and then the blue is what's listed as coloured in South African demographics. These are people who are racially mixed in some regard. And then, like, the whites are very small groups around there. Most of them obviously left at this point. Yugoslavia, another funny one, where you can see absolute strength, peak strength, in fact, because there is so much of a crossover, nothing would ever go wrong. Ever. Yeah, I mean, Yugoslavia ended in a really, really disgusting way because of this. Let's be frank. Because, yeah, you want Slovenia to go independent? Sure. Pretty much homogeneous. In which case, we can cut off some borders.
Yeah, that was
Slovenes
a bad
will
chapter.
leave.
Yes, and it's weird because many people say that now the war in Ukraine is the first war after World War II in Europe. That was a war.
Yeah, there were
in the
multiple
Balkan. Yeah.
as well.
Yes.
But the big thing there being like, okay, well, the Croatians are going to get independence. Well, where do we draw the border?
The thing
Oh,
is
no.
here, diversity was not strength.
And even worse with Bosnia, with peak diversity of the republics, which, for people who don't know, is somewhere in the middle there, in between all the red, blue, and I can't remember what colour they used for the Muslim Bosniaks. But, yeah, not easy to draw border. In which case, if you have war, in which ethnic groups want independence, going to be some war there. Because the thing is, the natural will of ethnic groups, I believe, just looking at this, and just some of my travelling as well, is that ethnic groups will eventually seek autonomy within any nation, and eventually, or seemingly at least desired, for independence.
I mean, the borders are exactly where you show the will to defend them, and when we have a situation like that, it's basically chaos.
But there are many like versions of states that we've had in human history, and the funniest ones from the 20th century are all about ideology. Like, oh, we're all together in this country. Why? Because I've had a big brain thought. And you'll have either liberalism being the main one. I mean, the United States still officially runs on that. The idea that, oh no, the reason the United States exists, its founding principles, are because of ideological reasons, not because of any ethnic characteristic, which is really weird. Because obviously they always were an ethnic group, the damn Yankees. And then in the modern age, they're trying to destroy that reality in some kind of sacrifice to the ideological worldview. The United States isn't really any group, it's an idea. And it's like, yeah, you can keep saying that. Yeah, it is in your constitution, but it's not really true looking at you guys. And the fact that you're doing that to yourselves is weird. And you'll get the similar version, of course, in the USSR. They're just like, oh, the reason we're all together, communism. Okay, cool. What happens when that goes away, though?
Problem.
Well, ethnic groups start declaring their states. We'll get to that in a minute. One of the main criticisms, of course, in regards to this is Africa. If you look at a map of Africa, ethnic groups, they've overlaid the borders they have, of course, there, and the black lines. Then the ethnic groups are every single blob. Okay, you get people who honestly say, oh, the Europeans did a terrible job in Africa. They draw terrible borders. Redraw them. Go on, redraw them. Make everyone happy. Good luck.
This is just ranting. It's it's people who constantly say, the law is arbitrary when it says that you should drive at age 16, age 18, why 18 rather than 17 or 19? I mean, the law has to be arbitrary in some respects because otherwise you don't have a law. And the same applies here in drawing borders.
I mean, you could draw one for each group. You're just going to end up with such a mess and a probably massive amount of war as a result. So, yeah. But the thing being that, well, why is there so much conflict in Africa? Well, a lot of it is ethnic. I mean, this is just, especially in the post-colonial period. Like, you can look up the various wars and Israel's backing of both sides, which is still funny to me. Do you know about that or not? In Nigeria, there was some independence movement in the south.
Enlighten me.
The Israelis funded both sides. I just love it when you go on Wikipedia, like you read the combatants and the supporters, and just Israel's on both sides for the whole war. It's just like, how did you get away?
I think they want to be with the winner.
It really is 5D chess.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's the main criticism on African borders you'll find, endlessly. But speaking of the USSR earlier, about the fact that what happens when the ideology just disappears? Well, ethnic groups. Endlessly. This is something I haven't really thought about, but then I've been paying a bit of attention to this and thinking about it a bit. And you can look up just the various conflicts or weird republics that were declared in the post-Soviet period in that part of the world. They're all on ethnic lines. And pretty much all of them. There is one exemption that we'll get to in a minute. But again, just them responding with ideology, in that case being Islam. But we'll start off with places you've never heard of, groups you've never heard of, and why would you? I don't even know how you say that. Gaguts?
What's that?
Gis? G. I'm going G. The G Republic. This is in, I believe this is in Moldova. We've got Transnistria next to them as well. They declared their independence for a short while before dissolving.
Geography lessons by Callum.
But it's a small ethnic group. That's why they declared their independence. That was the basis.
Yeah.
It was like, well, we as an ethnic group want our autonomy, if not independence. And the next one here, this is somewhere, I believe this is in Tajikistan or something. Do you know how to say that?
Karakalpakstan.
Way better than me.
Yeah.
Who's heard of them? Ever? Why would you?
It's in Uzbekistan, yeah.
But the point being, another ethnic group there that just wanted their independence in the post-Soviet period.
Yeah.
Been put in Uzbekistan? I think not. And then going for autonomy or independence and had their little conflict there as well. And then the next one, I think, is...
Ingushetia.
Way better than me again.
I think I've heard this.
Yeah, that's a republic in the Russian Federation still.
Yeah.
And the funniest part being, I love how... So the south of Russia, the Caucasus, is always referred to in the English language whenever someone does like a video traveling there or something. They're like, oh, it's the Wild West of Russia. And I just sit there and think, why? Why is it the Wild West of Russia?
Do they have Mexican standoffs there?
No, it's because there's a huge amount of ethnic minorities who want either autonomy or independence. That's why there's so many republics down there. And, well, how do you get independence?
Yeah.
So that's why it became the shooting grounds. And the obvious exception being, at least from the post-Soviet period, Islam. It's just like, okay, yeah, communism's dead. You know what? Allahu Akbar. That's our basis for our movement. Why we're going to have a state. Because, well, Allahu Akbar. And then we go back to the article itself. Just looking at what he deets in his thread I was mentioning earlier. He mentions Lebanon here. I'm not actually familiar with Lebanon's history, so I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to say what he said here. And I'm sure people can correct whatever's wrong. He mentioned here it was one of the wealthiest countries in the Middle East, when it had strict laws on repression in government, and demographics changed due to a large influx of Palestinian refugees. It fell into civil war, and today suffers corruption, hyperinflation, blackouts, terrorism, in a lot of it. Don't even want to get into that, but whatever. And he then goes on to mention Tibet as an example, which, yeah, I mean, why do we call what's happening in Tibet ethnic cleansing and bad? Well, it's because they're an ethnic group. And in which case they have the right to self-determination. And, well, they didn't want to be part of China. They moved in. And the destruction of that ethnic group is apparently bad. Only in Tibet. Only in foreign lands does the Western world suddenly think that ethnic cleansing is bad for some reason. And the main avenue of that happening here, as detailed by the CCP, is just mass migration. What if we moved loads and loads of Han Chinese in to the point that the Tibetans become a massive minority and then sort of disappear into the ashes of history? There's also just a lot of other messes he mentions. I don't know if you could just scroll through this. I mean, Yugoslavia is... I don't want to get into it. Yeah, did you know ethnic borderlands that you can't draw are going to end up with everyone killing each other? Yeah. I mean, do you know, in Central Asia, you know the really weird borders they have?
Yeah.
Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan where they take the piss. The reason for that is because Stalin knew this fact of humanity. Like, the reason for the mass transportation and the weirdness of the borders was to try and make it as impossible as he possibly could for them to actually obtain any kind of national movement that would lead to independence.
Yeah. And I want to add another dimension into what you're saying. I think that if we bear in mind this, the heterogeneity of groups in particular regions and where this has resulted, such as in old Yugoslavia, we will start thinking of the demographic problem we face in the West a bit more seriously.
Just the idea that it's going to have no effects, trust me. It'll be a rainbow paradise. It's like...
Yeah, it's not going to be a rainbow paradise.
I really...
And I think,
not sure about that.
I think serious predictions go about telling us that the resulting things are not going to be very, very tolerant.
No. I mean,
if the current demographic trends are not reversed.
So he lists a whole bunch more here. He goes through South Africa, Iraq, Burma, Liberia, which are all success stories.
Yeah,
I'm sure. Who doesn't want to live there? And it's just deets of, well, another diversity success story because they tried this. And I mean, Iraq's the really funny one. I love that. Just the American. There's a funny story I heard actually where this. I can't remember who he was. He was a Marine or something, and he was saying when he was in Iraq, they had to write some logbook and say what they've been up to, and he's like, I don't have anything to write in there.
Yeah.
So he's like, just write something. It's your job. Do it. We gotta send it off. So he sits around for a while and he thinks, what am I gonna write? Because someone is gonna read this. So he wrote in the logbook, Sir, why the United States, a presidential republic? Do we go around the world setting up parliamentary republics? Because that's what they did in Iraq. He just got shouted at in the end.
Yeah. But
the weirdness being of like, oh yeah, we'll just set up democracy and all go fine. It's like, no, we get factional infighting between different groups. Fantastic. So it's almost like these things were important and should have been taken into account, but whatever. There's the messes. And then the actual stories of diverse places being a huge success, he details in here just, well, how do you do that? If you go to the next link, he mentions, for example, Switzerland is federalized, has close to a homogeneous population ethnically and formed in particular historical circumstances. Of course, they have their divides between the Italians, the French, and the German-speaking Swiss, which I'm not going to call Germans because mountain Germans are weird. You know about that?
No, I don't know about that.
You got like the mountain Germans,
yeah.
Then you got the Germans, and then you got swamp Germans. You know what the swamp Germans are?
No.
Dutch. Live in swamps.
They always say that people in mountains, and I have some origin from the mountains, let's say, that we're a bit crazy in some cases.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a universal norm. Like the mountain folk are always far more...
unruly.
Yeah, they're actually able to maintain their independence. Because what are you going to do? Go tell them to stop? Yeah. Climb the mountain?
I mean, you can defend yourself against trespassers in a mountainous region much better than on a plain field.
Absolutely. But he mentions Singapore. Well, Singapore, he says, is an artificial authoritarian construct with stable demographics that forces integration and removes liberties to achieve social cohesion. And well, he did it very well, didn't he? The leader. I mean, I never hear anything bad about Singapore. I mean, the only things you hear that are quote-unquote bad are like, don't you know they whip people for breaking the law?
It reminds me of Milton Friedman. I think it was a quote by him who said, don't look at how people vote in elections. Look at how people vote with their feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely true. Speaking of which, though, going to some other diverse places that are doing well, I mean, there's the meme countries like Kuwait, where, yeah, incredibly diverse, but no one has citizenship, and the whole thing's being held up by the oil. As soon as that's gone, well, it's over. Are you really going to stay and fish for pearls? No one's doing that. But I did find a chart. It's a diversity scoreboard of every country in the world. It's It lists countries from most diverse to least diverse. I think it only does like the top 50 if you scroll down, and we'll get that like top 50 graph. It's not these texts here, but instead it has like a graph at the bottom. A chart, I should say, that one. So I suppose we'll read through. When you hear a country you're planning to move to in your life, or me, we'll stop it, I suppose. All right, number 1, Papua New Guinea. Tanzania, Democratic Republic of the Congo. Uganda, Liberia, Cameroon, Togo, South Africa, Congo, Madagascar, Gabon. I'm not even going to read them. Somalia, Yugoslavia. Well, that's gone. Ivory Coast, Chad, Indonesia's okay. Yeah. Mali, I love good war. Soviet Union, well, that's gone. Sudan, well, that cracked into 2. Nepal, it's not bad. And we end up with Eritrea at the bottom there, the North Korea of Africa. I mean, I'm just going to say, I don't think ethnic homogeneity just suddenly brings about wealth. That's obviously ridiculous. But it does help with stability. I think that's demonstrably true.
I mean, there is, I think, an indirect correlation because to have wealth, you need particular institutions, and you need people who can be accustomed into particular institutions that produce wealth. We frequently have cases where we had rich regions and rich countries and states that basically, after they changed their institutions, they weren't so rich anymore.
I'm just so sick of the denial, in the sense of the diversity is our strength, diversity is our strength. Trust me, it brings benefits. But then the idea that, well, if we didn't have that and instead had homogeneity, there are no benefits to that. No one ever speaks of it. And that's what's been playing on my mind. And also, as I mentioned, like, you destroy some empire that's based on ideology or the emperor, right? And what happens to the leftover lands? Well, they just kind of split off into ethnic states. It's like, what else were you expecting exactly? But we'll go to, because I mean, that was just some thoughts I had in my head, and I was like, I wonder if there's any research on this. So I looked it up. The Washington Post, of all places, actually did an article going over the data. Yeah,
I'm getting ready.
Yeah,
I'm getting ready.
You can see the map there. I think it's like the inverse of every map you've ever seen, where the green areas are not usually where the green is on the graph, but there we are. So this person says, I mapped the results above. And the greener countries, the more ethnically diverse, and the orange countries are more homogenous. There are a few trends you can see right away. Countries in Europe and Northeast Asia tend to be more homogenous. Sub-Saharan African nations are more diverse. 100% diverse, perhaps. The Americas are generally somewhere in the middle. And richer countries appear to be likely to be homogeneous. Homogeneous countries are richer. Yikes. In fact, the world's 20 most diverse countries are all African. There are likely many factors for this, although one might be the continent's colonial legacy. To be honest, I think it's entirely the colonial legacy. That's the way Africa is. I mean, there are a couple of exemptions. I can never remember the goddamn names, but the 2 states that are just like enveloped by South Africa, was it Lesotho and the other one, whose name I forget? Like, they're the only 2 seemingly exemptions where whoever was in charge was just like, yeah, you get your own ethno-state. Yeah. There you are. And that's that. They don't have that instability there as a result. Anyway, but some European overlords engineered ethnic distinctions to help them secure power. Most famously, the Hutu-Tutsi division in Rwanda, and they're stuck. European powers also carved Africa up into territories and possessions along lines with little respect to the actual people who live there. When Europeans left, the borders stayed. That's part of the African Union's mandate, forcing different groups into the same national boxes. You know how I was saying earlier that you'll get people criticizing evil whitey, the Europeans, because of their... Yeah.
Always.
How dare you make us so diverse? I thought diversity was a good thing. But we know we know that it's more complex than that. That obviously, if you have groups that are so ethnically diverse, they have nothing to do with each other. Why would you put them in the same nation and expect everything to go joyous? I mean, the Hutus and the Tutsis are really like the bottom end of things did not go joyous.
Yeah.
I think worse than Yugoslavia in that regard. And what I love is this person laying it out. And you can hear in their writing, they're just like, oh, yeah, stupid Europeans, am I right? You say that when we speak of Africa, but whenever you speak of anywhere else in the world, they're like, oh, no, it's good. Trust me. Whatever. I also love that they phrase it like it's cruel.
It's just their voting block. It's just political expediency. They want to attract an audience. They think that the audience is going to like hearing it. And maybe if they're not very popular in their countries, they want to create another voting base.
Sure, but at the same time, you can tell the person writing that knows what the truth is. They don't feel any political correctness when speaking of Africa. There's no need to. And, well, they can see, hang on a minute, that didn't really help them in their development, did it? I was like, no, funny that. They also write, Japan and the Koreas are the most homogenous on Earth. Racial politics can be complicated and nasty in these countries, where nationalism and ethnicity have at times gone hand in hand, from Hirohito's Japan to Kim Il-sung's North Korea. The lack of diversity perhaps informs these politics, although it's tough to say which caused which. Which is a great example of why ethnic homogeneity isn't some kind of silver bullet, North Korea being the one there.
Yeah.
You may think, and correctly it is true, that North Korea is a socialist state and therefore has that as its founding principle, officially. But whenever you read about North Korea, you'll quickly find out that homogeneity is not by accident. Really not by accident. Race mixing is a big old crime in North Korea.
Yep.
If a North Korean defector goes into China and becomes pregnant with a half Korean, half Chinese baby, and then is found by the police or goes back to North Korea and is found, and they guess that the baby is mixed race, do you know what they do with the mixed race baby?
I think they are terminating it.
Immediately.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty either. It's not like the sanitized abortions of the West. They literally wait for it to be born and throw it in a pile in which there are other babies just suffocating to death. This plastic box. It's horrific. There's actually a really funny, sort of funny story. There were some Cubans. They were doctors, right? And they were sent by the Cuban government as an act of socialist solidarity to North Korea. They arrived in North Korea, being Cuban. Skin tone wasn't exactly Korean.
Yeah.
There was a local crowd who apparently attacked them. They had North Korean guides with them, but still the crowd attacked them out of racial hatred. And they started a mini riot, according to the Cubans, who then complained about it. And the North Koreans were like, it won't happen again. Trust us. It's not some silver bullet. You, of course, have other things going on. But the thing that's holding back North Korea is obviously not homogeneity. It's communism. If you were having a guess, it might be something else. But it is also the most xenophobic nation on Earth. And that's because of the state wants to keep it that way. So
it's the propaganda. That's where all of the propaganda is based.
Like they actually have race nationalism as the founding tenets of the state. The actual state reason as to why the newest Kim has to be in charge. I don't know if you ever heard the story. The reasoning goes that for all of Korean history, the Korean race are the purest and the most trusting people in the world. They're the cleanest race.
You know what is weird? Because we always have with communists that they are allegedly internationalists.
Yeah.
They say that, we're internationalists.
And then you get this kind
we
of...
don't believe it. But whenever you come to the nitty-gritty, let's say, they always think that somehow they need to appeal to something other than absolute equality to bring people together.
North Korea especially, because of the influence of the Japanese. I don't have time for like a whole lecture about it. There's a guy who wrote a book about it called The Cleanest Race. It's a fantastic book. But he mentions in there that the reasoning is that North Koreans are the cleanest race because they're the most trusting, and this is why they've been taken advantage of by the evil Chinese and Japanese over the years, because they're so innocent. And then the American devils turned up as well.
Diversity is supposed to be the strength, but whenever we have diversity and weakness, it is something else's fault.
Sure, but in the North Korean case, the idea is that because they're the cleanest race and the most trusting and blah, 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 they get taken advantage of by these outside forces, which is why they need the dear leader, because he's the one protecting them from all these outside forces.
And is he also supposed to love them?
Yeah, and they love him.
Yeah.
There's actually some really creepy photos I've got to show you sometime. There's a lot of talk of the dear leader's bosom. Whole other thing. They write in here at the end, European countries are ethnically homogenous. This is, to me, one of the most interesting trends in the data. A number of now global ideas about the nation-state, about national identity as tied to ethnicity, and about nationalism itself originally came from Europe. Yes. Why do you think Germany and Italy exist, for one? Literally no other reason for them to be in existence other than just, maybe we should unify the Germans, maybe we should unify the Italians. I mean, the early years of revolution there. For centuries, Europe's borders shifted wildly and frequently, only relatively recently settling into what we see today, in which most large ethnic groups have their own country to speak of. That developed painfully over a very long time, and while there are still some exemptions, Belgium has ethnic Walloons, and Dutch, for example. In most of Europe, ethnicity and nationality are pretty close to the same thing. Yeah, I mean, the reason the Europeans shed so much blood during that concert of Europe period was about the ethnic states, the revolutions of that period.
Yeah.
And Belgium one is a really weird example to give up, because for people who don't know, the only reason Belgium exists is because of the British. We were like, we want a buffer state between Germany and France.
I didn't
Literally the
know
only reason it exists.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
That's why we called it a fake country. That's why Nigel Farage got in trouble for calling it a fake country. Because he was just like, you literally just exist because of politics.
Yeah.
You people aren't real. And so, yeah. And then you can get into the whole kingdom part of the United Kingdom as well. Yeah, we do have some ethnic mix up in the UK, but you can see it. You can see the borders. If you ever look up an ethnic map of the UK, you'll find it nice and easy. That's the reason we have independence movements today. Diversity and conflict. Internal conflicts appear on first blush to the more common greener countries, which make it some intuitive sense given that groups with comparable stakes in their country's economics and politics might be more willing to be cooperative, perhaps, be able to compete, perhaps violently, over these resources. But there's enough data here to draw a lot of different conclusions. One thing is to keep in mind that ethnicity might not be static or predetermined. In other words, as in the case of Somalia, might be worsening economic conditions or war make people more likely to further divide along ethnic factions. I kind of love that. It's like, yeah, you know the ethnic divisions within Somalia that turned it into, I don't know, battle royale before battle royale? Yeah, that's because of economics. It wasn't that the economics went bad and therefore the ethnic groups retreated into their own circles.
Okay.
The ethnic groups existed before the economic
I'm
collapse.
not very much aware of the economic practices in Somalia. I know I was watching some clips about the pirates and, how they try to pirate tankers and stuff like that. But, yeah.
It's just weird. I'm running out of time, so I'll be real quick. They also say strong democracy correlates with ethnic homogeneity. We had that. Then they go on to talk about the fractured societies have more war. And then the paper's conclusion are that none of this matters. Really weird conclusion.
Why did you write it then?
I don't get it. I don't know if the authors went, hang on a minute. Yeah. We're going to get in trouble. We're Americans. Like this can't be said. They literally go on to say it doesn't matter in general.
They said it, but they didn't. It's like they need to have plausible deniability.
Yeah, they have this weird conclusion as well, where they try and justify everything they've just found away, where they say that when people persistently identify with a particular group, they form potential interest groups that can be manipulated by politicians.
This is the worst attempt at winking.
It's so weird. Yeah. I just can't get over, don't you know that politicians are using the friction between the Irish and the English? It's not English politicians running the IRA, mate. No, these are organic things that come within the group. Whatever. But there you have it. The data, I think, is there. Something I've noticed, something I'm thinking about. Let me know what your thoughts are. Otherwise, that's that. If you appreciated that episode from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium hangouts, this episode on How Do We Save England. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.